everyone. This is my presentation on my research methodology for my topic, which is the moral economies of East African refugee camps. The original puzzle I was looking at is how have refugee camps outlived their foundations as temporary solutions, because the problems that are causing these mass migrations are far from over. And the sub-puzzle kind of leading out of that is what social institutions or social structures have arisen because these refugee camps have been along for so long, and how do the unique conditions of living in a refugee camp inform how these institutions look like. So one particular institution I was really looking at was this idea of a moral economy. So my literature review is kind of split into two parts. One part is the moral economy. On one end, there are the individualists and the neoclassists that take their basis from Adam Smith and the very foundation of capitalism and say that the individual is the maker of the market and that we need complete economic deregulation. And they would all argue that moral economies do not exist. On the other end, the people that do argue that a moral economy exists or in some way can be created are those that emphasize social networks and the collective identity of groups. So a moral economy in general is saying that these social identities and network connections make goods that are usually too expensive affordable for people, so that personal profit of one person is taken down, but everyone can gain. And they're definitely looking at it from a more critical theory and postmodern theory. On the other end, there are the social capacity of refugee camps. So just to connect these two topics, both sides of the literature do agree that exclusion is a factor in living in a refugee camp, although the people that believe in static exclusion are those that think that this hinders any kind of socialization at all. On the other end, there are the people that emphasize that there still exist really rich social networks that make refugee camps a place of socialization. My research question is, how does ethnic makeup and space formalization affect the strength of moral economies in Dabab's and Kakuma refugee camps in Kenya? And these are just two hypotheses if you wanted to look at it. They just follow the method that it's a conjunction of variables coming together to make the dependent variable. And just my cases are the Dabab and Kakuma refugee camps from 1991 to the present, 1992 for the present, because that is the start of operation to the present. Justification is that to study moral economies, you do have to study African economies, and they are the largest and the oldest in the region, so therefore they have the most scholarship. And I chose to do two cases at the same time instead of a historical analysis because I wanted to emphasize what the moral economies looked like in the present day. My dependent variable is the strength of a moral economy, and I wanted to measure this through indicators drawing from Howard's article on the UN peacekeeping mission. So I would ask a set of questions. So an example would be something like, is there a prevalence of informal market spaces? Other questions that are informed by what a moral economy is in my literature review, and they would get points if there was evidence for it, and they would get deducted points if there was not evidence for it, and then obviously a higher score would show a higher strength. And the evidence I would use from this is a lot of op-eds and case reports of people actually going to these spaces and describing the economies of the marketplaces and or the lack thereof. My first independent variable is the ethnic makeup. So I was operationalizing this by using certain factors that that is informed by my literature review and refugee camp spaces, as well as how these camps look. So looking at the socio-demographic maps and databases, and operationalizing them as on the overall, so how much percentage of ethnic groups exist, but also how much they can interact, so how they are clustered within the camp itself, and then categorizing that as low, medium, and high. My second independent variable is space formalization by the UNHCR, so that I mean how formal or informal has the camp space been created. So if it was more informal, there was ways for these refugees to create market spaces that would allow for a moral economy. If it was less formal, these market spaces wouldn't be taken into consideration because it is a refugee camp. And this is looking at other UNHCR reports as well as camp profiles and independent studies. My intervening variable is the amount of aid given to a refugee camp, and the reason this intervening is because the literature informs me that the way refugees in refugee camps use aid is how they get their goods for an economy. So this is measured obviously in US dollars for monetary aid, but also the physical aid as categorized by the UNHCR, so food, water, shelter, education, and things like that. And those are coming from the same reports and the same independent studies that are informing my other two independent variables. This is my causal model. There is this interplay between ethnic makeup and space formalization, and it is come into the physical sense through the amount of aid, and then that informs the strength of the moral economy. I'm analyzing this using Mill's methods of difference, so I'm trying to understand how these factors create a difference in moral economy, so the difference in strengths. So that's why I would use this method. And then just addressing validity, reliability, and falsifiability. My literature review informs my variables and how they're operationalized. And these are from very respected sources, so it's reliable but also valid. And then also just being transparent in my process in general, supporting my decisions made from evidence and things as that, and things in that nature. To address falsifiability, obviously this all can be proven wrong. To connect it back to reliability again, you can use my framework that I've designed, do your own research, and come to very different conclusions that may be contrary to what I find, and that's what makes all of this valid, reliable, and falsifiable. Reflecting on the course in general, I really wanted to use a small n case study because I wanted to look specifically into a region, but I also felt it was important to be able to generalize. And also you can find the actual causal model. You can't really generalize if you use interpretivists, but you can't actually find the actual causes if you're using large n statistical research. But one thing that I don't like about it is that I can't get as specific as I would like as you can in a interpretivist research design. But some challenges that I'm facing is that there's no other research that connects these two topics. So I, in one way, have a lot of freedom, but in other ways are constrained by that. And then looking at 306, I just have to remain open and do more research and figure out if I need to redefine my variables, reoperationalize them, or maybe add a couple more. But I am constrained logistically by the lack of published material on this topic. It isn't really something in the media's lens, as well as the methods that can practically be done because I am so far away from the subject and I really am relying on what other people are saying. But in general, I'm really excited to see where this takes me, and thank you so much for listening.